All right. Thank you all for your patience as we dealt with some tech issues. It seems inevitable. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to Confronting Wildfires in an Era of Climate Emergency. Thank you to those who made it in person. It's great to be in the space with you. And we also had more than 300 people register to attend online. So it's a pretty good audience with us tonight, even though we can't see all of them in front of us. My name is Emiko Newman. I'm the coordinator of the BC Climate Emergency Campaign, which is a joint initiative of over 45 organizations that have come together over the past 3 years to collectively call for a fundamental reboot of our provincial climate plan, Clean BC, and to call for the creation of a robust and genuine climate emergency plan for our province. We are so excited to be co-hosting tonight's event with the UBC Centre for Climate Justice. And I want to say a special thank you to Katie and Jack for all their hard work in putting tonight's event together. We are gathered on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, who have been stewarding these lands for thousands and thousands of years. And given that, I would like to invite Cecilia Point to the stage from Musqueam Nation to welcome us into the space and open the event.
Hachka Emi. Asiem Nasieya, Anta Cecilia Point, Talitanatwa Hamasquium, Amid Subquap Quilam, Natsamat Tesqualoan. I said, my name's Cecilia Point. I'm from the Musqueam First Nation, and I welcomed you all to my territory today. And I said, Natsamat Tesqualoan, we're all one heart and one mind. So I said to Emmy, I'm so happy we're inside today. Didn't know we were going to be outside, and I know we've all been outside on those front lines in the rain. So now that I'm getting older, I like being inside. So the purpose of the protocol welcome, as you all well know, is to give you a sense of where you are, this place and the territories we're on and the people who've lived here for thousands of years. So this place used to be a very wet and rainy place. And we had these items of clothing to keep us dry, and they really do keep us dry. There was woolly dogs that used to roam the hills around here, as well as sheep, of course, and goats. And, you know, it's a very oily fur, and you make thick, tight wound blankets and capes out of it to keep you warm. Cedar hats, the same thing. They keep us really dry. So I'm finding less and less that I need these items and that it's getting too hot to wear them. And it's, you know, I'm thinking about my great grandpa, and I always talk about my ancestors and always talk about my great grandpa, who I would say Vancouver dropped on him like a building, because he was 104 years old when he passed. So at the turn of the century, 1900, we didn't track his age back then, the elders, he was around 18 or 20 years old. So Vancouver just built up. And he told us the stories of the two-headed serpent, our creation story. The two-headed serpent slithered all around what is now the Lower Mainland, and it would walk with Hals, our creator, to turn trees, rocks, rivers, transformers back into people, animals. And that's why all of these things around this place mean so much to us, because they are our relatives. They are our friends. And you'll get that feeling when you go into the local mountains or when you sit by the water. If you've had a hard day, I really recommend that. Go sit by the water and put your hand in the water if it's too cold to walk all the way in, and go into the forest. Just walk up into the mountains, and you'll feel your friends around you. So I think many of you that have come here and migrated from other places, now you love this place too. So I raise my hands to you because I see so many familiar faces that I always see out there fighting for climate, fighting to protect this place. And that's what we're taught, of course, for the next 7 generations. And we're just coming out of the trauma of the past 7 generations, where we lost our language, our culture, our families. And again, we used to live in big long houses because it was too wet to live outside. We didn't have teepees here. We lived in big, solid long houses with our families and our communities. And we were always taught to look after each other and to look after this place. So I love the sense of community in the climate movement. And even though it seems like we're at war, we want to keep positive. I have a little exercise that I do where you breathe in and you breathe in, picturing the cedar boughs cleaning your lungs and your blood, and push it all out, push out all the bad and the negative. And I don't know why that just came to me a few weeks ago. I was having a very stressful time just because of my stupid job, but still have to make money because I have 2 grown adult kids at home. But I really encourage you to do that. So yes, it'll be very sad if every place is covered with smoke and we can't breathe here. So I really encourage you to keep up the hard work and to get up in the morning and face the east and ask Creator for the strength to keep going. There's so many other big issues in the world, of course. We're all praying for peace as well, but we have to put all that positivity out there for everything. There is a war at home. You know, we just lost it's interesting. The people in the east of Canada have a 2-headed serpent as well. And their story is different. And I don't totally remember it, but it's these 2 evil heads of the serpent coming together, which to me look like the 2 pipelines that you know, that have come and finished at this end of what they call Turtle Island. We don't call it that on this place, but it's fascinating to me because that means that all the people are going to rise up together and really pick up that mantle. So don't give up. And again, I raise my hands to you. So I'm just going to close with our paddle song. And I always tell people, I like you to picture yourselves or your families coming in on your canoes to my territory and my relatives going out on their canoes to greet you. OCM. Hiya ho ho hiya he hiya hiya ho he hiya he hiya he hiya he hiya he hiya Hiya ho ho hiya he hiya hiya ho he hiya he hiya he hiya he hiya he ho 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 Hiya, hiya, hey, hiya, ho, ho, hiya, hey, hiya, ho, hiya, ho, hey, hiya, hey, hiya, hey, hiya, hey, hiya, hey. Hiya, hiya, hey, hiya, ho, ho, hiya, hey, hiya, Hi-ya-ho, hi-ya-hey, 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 hi-ya-hey. Oh, 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 oh. Yeah, have a good night, everyone.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, for that beautiful song and your really inspiring welcome. We're really glad that you were able to join us tonight and open the event in such a good way. I apologize to the folks joining us online. We're still trying to figure out how to get all of this tech stuff sorted. Hopefully we'll be able to see our fourth panelist up here pretty soon. So in 2023, Canada did not merely experience a record year of wildfires, we completely shattered all previous records. The amount of land burned, which was 18 million hectares, was roughly twice the size of Ireland and larger than all of Greece. The carbon emissions from last year's fires on their own were roughly 3.5 times more than all of Canada's emissions total from every other source. Tragically as well, last year, 4 wildland firefighters lost their lives on the job. Now, here we are in May 2024, and already 107 active fires are burning across our province. Many of these are actually what's known as zombie fires, which means they started burning last year. They've been smoldering underground all throughout winter, just waiting for spring and warmer temperatures for them to reemerge. That's pretty frightening to think about. To add to this reality, Canada just experienced its warmest winter ever, and snowpack levels are the lowest they've been in 50 years. Often when we hear experts talk about wildfires, they're talking about wildfire response, how we can best protect ourselves and our property, the importance of obeying the evacuation orders, and just generally how we can prepare ourselves for such events. But what's so often missing from these conversations is fossil fuels. The fact that it's fossil fuels that are fueling the climate crisis, that are leading to hotter, drier, and more dangerous summers. And yet, in our province, our government continues to approve new fossil fuel projects, new terminals, to provide subsidies to the industry, which is locking in fossil fuel infrastructure for decades and decades to come. So we're here tonight to have a real and honest conversation about the importance of balancing investments in emergency response and preparedness with spending on climate action that actually drives emissions down. We're cognizant of the fact that we're facing what is most likely going to be another quite frightening summer with fires and other climate disasters. And we're also uniquely placed right now because we're approaching a provincial election in October. So with this in mind, it's crucial for us to continue having conversations like the one that we're going to be having tonight and make sure that climate is a central part of the discourse. So it's now time to pass it over to our esteemed panelists. We will have time for audience questions at the very end, so do keep that in mind as you're listening to the conversation. And we're aiming to wrap things up by 9 p.m. So I'm now going to pass it over to our excellent moderator for the night, Seth Klein. Seth served for 22 years as the founding director of the BC office of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, or the CCPA, Canada's foremost social justice think tank. He's now a policy consultant, a speaker, a writer, and author of A Good War, Mobilizing Canada for the Climate Emergency, a book you should most definitely read if you have not already. He also writes a regular column for Canada's National Observer, and on top of all of that, he's the Director of Climate Emergency Strategy and Team Lead with the Climate Emergency Unit. Over to you, Seth.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Emiko, for the intro, and thank you for all your work and leadership making this event happen. Thank you. Thank you, Cecilia, for that welcome. And thanks to all the volunteers from the BC Climate Emergency Campaign and the folks with the UBC Center for Climate Justice for helping to make this happen. And thank you, all of you who are joining us both in person and online for this panel, Confronting Wildfires in an Era of Climate Emergency. So as Emiko has said, I mean, here we are in early May, and wildfire season is already upon us, just as the climate emergency is clearly upon us. If I may, I just want to make some opening comments, and I want to read 2 paragraphs only from the preface of my own book, which was written in 2019. This is what people now nervously joke about as the new normal, although it is in truth not normal, and but a taste of things to come. These weather events we are increasingly experiencing and the warlike mood they create represent attacks on our soil. They are a call to mobilize. And I wrote a bit about, at the time I was writing, there were, if you may remember, there were these incredible wildfires in Australia. In the face of the wildfire emergency, the Australian government was forced to deploy the most military assets since the Second World War. Sadly, the emergency response was purely defensive, a rearguard action. Our governments have not yet seen fit to adopt a wartime scale response that preemptively tackles the climate crisis. We mobilize to put fires out, but not yet to prevent them. The paradox of our time. And that's a sentiment that was echoed by West Kelowna Fire Chief Jason Brolin, who, after last summer's brutal fires, attended the UN Special Climate Ambition Summit in New York last September, where he said, climate change became very real for West Kelowna on August 16th. Over $20 million was spent reacting to my fire, but we are spending the money on the wrong end of the problem. Last fall, I went on a little speaking tour of the Okanagan after they endured this summer of fires in the Shuswap and West Kelowna and the Suyus. About 400 homes destroyed, thousands evacuated, huge hits to tourism and the local economy. And as Emiko alluded to, the loss of 2 young lives, 2 firefighters. First, 19-year-old Devin Gale from Revelstoke, and then 25-year-old Zach Muse from Kelowna. So they were 2 of the 4 in BC and 8 across the country who lost their lives last summer. And as some of you will know, I spent a lot of time thinking and talking about World War II, drawing lessons for the current mobilization. And I think about how in World War II, Canada was a population of about 11 million people. Over 1 million of them enlisted. I mean, that's a mobilization. 64% of whom were under the age of 21. And I think about, you know, who are those young people today? Well, it's Devin and Zach, isn't it? These young people mobilizing once again in our collective defense. And we should remember their names. So to offer a little bit more framing up of this event in the panel, we have a stellar panel for you, and who are gonna share their insights from different perspectives and enhance our understanding of those on the front lines of this emergency. And we've given them a dual challenge. We know that some escalation of these extreme events is already baked in, even if we were to do everything right as of tomorrow. So consequently on this panel, we're trying to address 2 dynamics. One, how do we better prepare for the inevitability of more extreme weather, such as more frequent and fierce wildfires? And how can we do a better job of keeping our communities and vulnerable workers and populations safe? But second, how do we expedite the driving down of our greenhouse gas emissions so that we can keep temperatures lower and as a result, our children and grandchildren safer in the long term? And how can we press our governments to stop making things worse? Or put another way, as Emiko said, how do we balance spending and investments to prepare for more fires on the one hand, and investments to tackle the underlying climate crisis on the other? So some logistics. We're going to hear from our 4 panelists first, with some opening comments of 5 to 10 minutes each. I'm going to introduce them each just before they speak. And then I'm going to moderate a conversation with them, and then we'll take some questions from you, both for a floor mic for those of you here, and also for those of you online. You can post questions in the Q&A or the chat. In the Q&A. And Emiko will bring some of those up. I should mention that for those of you who are here in person, if you didn't see it already, we have copies of John Valiant's book available for sale, and they are signed. So I just want to do a little tech check. Are we good? Are we not? Should I go to John or should I go to one of our others? What? We're good. Okay, so first up, hopefully we'll get John up on the screen, is John Valiant, who resides in Vancouver, but has graciously joined us by video from Ottawa, where he is, because he is nominated for the Shaughnessy Cohen Prize, one of the country's most prestigious book awards. And it is 3 hours later there for John. So he has valiantly, you see my pun there, agreed to stay up for us. John is an extraordinary writer. His work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, National Geographic, The Guardian, among others. His wonderful first book, The Golden Spruce, was a bestseller and won several awards. His second nonfiction book, The Tiger, was also a bestseller and published in 16 languages. In 2015, he published his first book of fiction, The Jaguar's Children. And of course, Fireweather is a #1 national bestseller. It's won the Baillie Gifford Prize in the UK. It was a finalist for the National Book Award in the US and the Writers' Trust Nonfiction Prize. Fireweather was named as one of the 10 best books of 2023 by the New York Times. It has recently been optioned to be turned into a feature film. And just announced today, it has been named as a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize. So congrats, John. Friends, if you have not yet read Fireweather, I cannot recommend it highly enough. The idea for this panel started with the desire to profile John's book. And as someone who does a little writing myself, I must tell you, I read it with great jealousy because the writing is so beautiful and compelling. It's the story of the 2016 Fort McMurray wildfire, but from there it crosses geography and time to tell the story and history of fire and our changing climate. And it's reaching new and unusual audiences, driving home the urgency of what we confront. It's really a must read. So John, if you haven't already, I'm going to ask you to unmute, and the floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
Turn on your video.
Can you see me?
We had you
Here
for a
we go.
second there.
Yeah.
We just needed you to turn on your video.
Yeah. How's that?
We see your name, and now
Yeah,
we just need you to turn on your camera.
I've got a, you can't start your video because the host has
Which
stopped
I think
it.
you have to do at your end.
And yeah, no, I'm getting, whenever I try to start the video, I get the message about the unable to start.
See if he texted me or something.
And FaceTime.
We're gonna go to the next speaker first and sort out the tech difficulties. All right. So bear with us, John. I know it's late,
Sure.
but we're gonna go to our first other panelist, who is Joe Gilchrist, with the Salish Firekeepers Society and an expert in traditional cultural burning. Joe was born in Kelowna. His mother is from Ashcroft and his father is from Skecheston. He started his forest firefighting career at the age of 15 as an emergency hire, and in 1991 began work on the Type 1 unit crew, the all-Indigenous crew known as the Merit Fire Devils. In 1996, Joe became a full-time employee with the BC Wildfire Service after completing a 16-week Indigenous fire prevention technician training. And he went on to become a forest prevention technician in Merit. Currently, Joe works as an Indigenous firekeeper to bring cultural fire use and traditional to traditional Indigenous territories. When we put the word out that we were seeking a speaker who could talk about Indigenous community experiences and responses to wildfires, all roads led to Joe Gilchrist, and he has made the trip from Kelowna to be with us tonight. So thank you, Joe, and the floor is yours. And you can speak right from that there. So.
Does that work okay? Okay. Yeah, so I'm Joe Gilchrist from Skitchiston. I was born in Kelowna and I am a firekeeper. So what that means is that over thousands of years, the Indigenous people used fire on the land, right from the valley bottoms all the way to the top of the mountain for different reasons. In the places that we lived, we used fire to keep our area safe where we're living. And in the summertime, up higher where it's cooler, so we would pick and hunt and fish in higher elevations, and we would burn it. And especially in the fall time. Different elevations burn at different times of the year, and we're in a mountainous area too, so different aspects burn at different times of the year also. So unfortunately, right now, to bring fire back, the government gives us a tiny little window to burn, which is March, when the snow leaves and the grass starts to dry, then you can start to burn things up until they put the burn ban on. And the burn ban is on right now, so we're not allowed to burn anything. We're allowed to burn on reserve, and they can't come and tell us not to, but you know, for the good of society and all that kind of stuff, you know, to stay away from fighting with the neighbors and things like that. It's always good to, you know, to do your best to not cause trouble. So we try to get as much burning as we can done on the reserves. That's the only place that's legal to burn right now for us is on reserve. If we want to burn off the Indian Reserve, we have to go through a prescription process, and it takes a long time. 3 to 5 years to get all the signatures. And it's quite an onerous process to go through. And a bit intimidating also if you don't know who to contact and how to get started and things like that. So a lot of that has fell off the wayside. So if we went back thousands of years from the stories my people gave about fires, is that in the springtime, the animals would start to come alive, and animals will start coming back from the south, and it was really busy. The sky was full of waterfowl. The ground was frogs and snakes and things like that were waking up out of the mud, and they were traveling to wherever they wanted to go. And it was, and butterflies and flowers and everything was, you know, was normal. And then when I think about, you know, when I was young, around the 1970s, I could remember the frogs waking up in the springtime and crossing the highways and things like that. And it'd just be just like a highway of frogs, you know, just leaving the ponds and stuff like that. And in the springtime and in the fall time, when the when the waterfowl were going north and south, the sky was literally full. And I remember when I was a kid, you know, I could count Canada geese, a V, and there was 300. But there wasn't just one, there was stacks up high, as high as you could see, way up there, like you could just barely see them in there. But and at night, and it was 24 hours a day for about a month and a half. And it was so loud, you know, you couldn't sleep at nighttime and stuff like that. They're just, it was so crazy. Now you think about it now and you hardly see any of these things. What happened, you know? Uh, Encroachment of the land from different, like our areas that used to be grassland is encroached on by sage. And then sage is encroached on by fir and ponderosa pine. And I'm talking about in the lower elevations where we live, up in the Kamloops, Kelowna, Osoyoos, you know, that whole kind of desert plateau area. And so all these battles are going on. The sage actually drops a chemical when the leaves fall off that prohibit grass and things that are natural from growing. So the sage takes over the whole area without the human use of fire. This happens, and now what we're seeing is that the sage is so overaged because it's good medicine, but it never was as plenty as it is now. But it's so overaged, and the leaves are actually too small to use for medicine. It takes too long to pick, so it's unhealthy. And same with the fir and the ponderosa pine, it's getting too thick, and and when you think about it that way, and you think about the wildfire, the climate change, how, you know, 50-degree for 6 days can just make that fuel type just ready for a fire. You know, any spark that happens, you know, it's going to be a catastrophic wildfire, and that's what we're seeing. And that's just that one fuel type. And there's lodgepole pine up just a little bit higher at about 1,000 meters and higher above that is the subalpine fir, the spruce, where the ski resorts and stuff are up there. And those fires are the most dangerous ones that can happen if that dries out. You know, like Whistler would probably be a good one. Sun Peaks, Big White, things like that, where those forests are meant to be a standard placement fire. A standard placement fire means that the whole forest is meant to burn. The tree type actually throws sparks to make fire happen. And the more drier, the windy it is, the farther those sparks can go. They can go 5 to 10 kilometers. So it doesn't matter how big your guard is. It doesn't matter how many people or airplanes are on the ground. The sparks are going to be flying way out, right? And now what we're seeing now, especially if you think about last year, all the smoke from all the fires, and the airplanes couldn't take off to fight the fire. The helicopters couldn't take off. The crews can't fight the fires if they can't see the tops of the trees, just in case one of them falls down. So, and then, you know, just driving out in that, you know, and that is dangerous too. So, you know, what can be done to stop this is bringing back cultural burning, allowing Indigenous land stewardship to come back, and our science on cultural burning is thousands and thousands of years old. All that science was done thousands of years ago, and our people still know the stories of the medicine, the animals and the plants, and where things need to burn and what times of year and things like that. But it's going to take a big change. I think the parties that are in power right now, with the election coming up, it would have to be like a political issue to change from response to prevention.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks very much. And over at our controllers here, but I think we should just continue with the panel and bring John in as our final panelist. So I'm going to move to you, Maura. Dr. Maura Brown is a radiologist and a clinical assistant professor of diagnostic radiology at UBC. A lifelong enjoyment of the outdoors and love for all living things led her to her interest in climate change and pollution and biodiversity loss and the associated risks to human health. She is dedicated to work on reducing emissions and waste, in particular within the healthcare system. Maura is also an active member of CAPE, the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, an organization no doubt familiar to many of you, advocating for protection and promotion of human health through healthier environments and ecosystems. But CAPE is also a very active partner with the BC Climate Emergency Campaign, and we're thrilled that Maura could join us and speak to the health dimensions of wildfires and climate. So please join me in welcoming Maura Brown. Whichever one you prefer. If you use that one, just lean into it a little bit.
I have to look at my notes here. Thank you. I'm going to just take this off while I talk. I'm very honored to be here with you, Seth, and with the Climate Emergency Campaign and the UBC Center for Climate Justice. Thank you for the invitation. My role here today is to review the health harms of wildfires from the general health perspective. As climate change-fueled wildfires around the globe are increasing in frequency, severity, and duration, we need to understand the health effects as our wildfire smoke exposure increases. I'm also a mother. I'm deeply worried about the future that we're leaving for our children and our young people. I am not a content expert on wildfires, nor a researcher or clinician specific to health and wildfire events. I have spent my life in BC in various locations around the province. I remember growing up that although there'd be the occasional notable fire, it really wasn't very often. It was nothing like we've been seeing in the last decade, where we have regular summers with hundreds of fires, smoky skies, and evacuations. As recently as the Okanagan Mountain Fire in 2003, when our close friends lost their home, it was rare to hear of a fire entering an urban area. In the last 10 or 15 years, research about the health harms of wildfire smoke has increased significantly. As drought and warmer temperatures lead to longer fire seasons, we are experiencing increasingly extreme areas burned and intensity. This impacts health through acute and repeated annual exposure to wildfire smoke. Disruption of road access, water supply, and power services reduce our ability to provide healthcare when our transportation and communication lines are disrupted and supply chains become unreliable. Healthcare workers might also be personally impacted and unavailable to assist if their own health is threatened or if they have to evacuate their own homes. Wildfire smoke is a complex mixture of hazardous air pollutants, including small particles called PM 2.5, which stands for or means particulate matter of less than 2.5 microns, which is about 30 times smaller than a human hair. It also includes nitrogen dioxide, ozone, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and other pollutants. These pollutants contaminate the air, water, soil, and unprotected indoor environments. The PM 2.5 particles are considered the principal public health threat. And when inhaled, they're so tiny they can extend deep into the lungs and can be absorbed into the bloodstream. The adverse health effects of wildfire smoke includes increase in all-cause mortality, increased respiratory disease and infection, cardiovascular events, and neurologic disease, as well as damage to other organ systems. Impacts on mental health can occur acutely related to evacuations and long-term related to PTSD and loss of housing and other significant impacts. The health impacts of wildfire smoke are very costly. In 2023, the Canadian Climate Institute estimated health costs of $1.2 billion, just the healthcare, in June of 2023 in Ontario from smoke arising from the fires in Quebec. A paper from Brazil in 2023 estimated an economic loss of $5 billion US per year from 2000 to 2016 from mortality related to the PM 2.5 pollution. The health impacts of wildfires are very inequitably distributed and depend on many factors that intersect and compound with one another. The most vulnerable are people who live in areas of geographic risk, which includes rural and remote BC, people who are underhoused or living in poverty, pregnant people, children and the elderly, and those who have pre-existing respiratory and cardiac disease. Outdoor workers experience a range of adverse effects due to their own pre-existing health or age, with risk increased by consistent outdoor exposure, particularly if exertion is required. The inequity might be further compounded if emergency support services are inequitably distributed and or difficult to access. This was noted in the October 2023 BC Ombudsperson's report regarding the 2021 wildfires and floods. So the health harms by system include respiratory, and even in healthy people, irritation of the eyes and respiratory tract can occur with high dose short-term exposure, so that people get itchy eyes, might have cough, phlegm, wheeze, shortness of breath, and potentially a decrease in their lung function because of an inflammatory response. Asthma can be exacerbated, which means they get worse and they may need more medication use. They may need to visit their family physician or go to the ER more often and or be admitted to hospital. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease patients might experience worsening shortness of breath and similarly require additional medical visits and medication. The particle pollution can affect the lungs' ability to remove inhaled foreign materials, which means that they're no longer able to fend off infections, and there's increased risk with COVID, both of getting sick and death. This was reported in 2021 in Washington State. Cardiovascular impacts include heart failure, increase in heart attack, stroke, visits to the emergency room. Pregnancy, a study in Brazil in 2014 found that agricultural burning in the Amazon forest was associated with low birth weight infants. Endocrine studies, recently there's been an association of inhalation of particle, the 2.5 PM air pollution, with development of type 2 diabetes. And long-term impacts can include the risk of cancer. Many of the pollutants found in wildfire smoke are also human carcinogens. A 2019 study in California of wildland firefighters did find an increased risk of lung cancer. And a study from McGill suggests that long-term exposure to wildfire smoke is associated with lung and brain cancer. And there's other associations of air pollution, the nitrogen dioxides with bladder and gastric stomach cancer. There's also impacts on mental health, with air pollution being associated with reduced cognitive performance, depression and anxiety, and even ADHD in children. And there's a new term in the psychology literature called soulstalgia, which is used to describe the distress produced by environmental damage to your home and surroundings. So you haven't left, you're not feeling nostalgic, just your environment is changing in a not a positive way. So obviously all of these acute and chronic health effects increase the strain on our already stressed health system through increased need for primary care, visits to emergency room, increased need for medication, hospital admissions, and increased population illness and death. So what do we do? The mitigation and adaptation approaches have been discussed in terms of mitigation being reducing fossil fuels so that we slow down the forest fires and the changes that are happening. And then adaptation is, what do we do about what's here already? We need to educate the healthcare workforce so that everyone understands these risks and can treat the patients appropriately. We need to make sure that our population is informed and educated about the risks so that they can prepare beforehand and take action during a wildfire event to reduce the risk of adverse outcomes. In Canada, the Air Quality Index is reported along with the health risk, which is a good thing. There's a new app called the WeatherCan app. that's available for anyone to download, and you can put in your own health risks and set the settings so that the alarms in your local area notify you when there's a wildfire event, when it's not safe for you to be outside. So individuals can prepare by understanding their own risk based on their background health, making sure that you follow or the individual follows the local health index conditions, knows how to access that, ensuring that medications, particularly the breathing medications for asthma or COPD, are that you have plenty of a supply in your home. It's very important that indoor air is clean. So either a portable air cleaner or putting a filter on an HVAC system if you have a forced air furnace. And it's also a good idea to have a supply of N95 masks, as they do filter out the 2.5 micron pieces, which are the little particles that are the dangerous ones. In addition, we know that people spend time indoors and even more time indoors when the air quality is poor. So it's really important to protect health, that we maintain an indoor air quality that is safe, or that there's community availability of respite centers for cleaner air. So to make your home safe, as we were talking about, you want to close the doors and windows, install high quality filters on your furnace, set the HVAC system so that it recirculates and doesn't consistently draw in the polluted air from the outdoors. And then to keep it clean, you want to not burn anything in your house. So avoid smoking, avoid vacuuming, because if there's dust that settles, stirring up the dust can make the air pollution in the air quality inside your house less good. Avoiding burning things like incense or candles, wood stoves or fireplaces shouldn't be used. And avoiding cleaning products that have high volatile organic compounds. In addition, our communities need to make sure that we have clean air respite centers available for everybody. These could be community centers, libraries, malls, or schools. They should be available whenever an individual is not able to keep their indoor air clean at a safe temperature and an adequate amount of humidity. Health Canada has actually published a primer for municipalities, providing guidance for basic requirements for clean air respite centers during wildfire smoke events, with a target level at which you shouldn't go beyond for the PM 2.5 and other pollutants, and ideal temperature and humidity. So in summary, the health burden of wildfire smoke is large, with both chronic and acute risks to our health. As with all the health impacts of the climate crisis, the burden falls inequitably on the most vulnerable in society and those who are least well equipped to recover adequately. Local and global human health can be protected by mitigation measures to reduce burning of fossil fuels, as well as adaptation measures to improve individual, community, and health system resilience to manage the impacts of which we can no longer avoid. Future damage will be reduced as we transition to a clean energy and we reduce our local air pollution and our harmful greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you, Maura. Quite the litany of impacts, although I'm trying to hold on to the Dr. Brown says no vacuuming piece. Next up, it's my great pleasure to introduce Byron Cruz. So Byron is somebody that many of you have probably heard on the radio before, given his longstanding advocacy work for migrant communities. He's a member of Sanctuary Health Collective and the Migrant Rights Network. He also works with the Health and Safety Center of the BC Federation of Labor. He arrived in Canada as a refugee with his partner, and since then, they have been deeply committed and very active. I feel like I have seen you and crossed paths with you so many times over the years, improving the working conditions and advocating for the rights of migrants and refugees in their communities. In addition to Byron's advocacy work, he's actively participated in various networks responding to emergencies during heat waves and flooding in British Columbia. These experiences have driven home the importance of inclusive emergency response strategies that prioritize the needs of vulnerable workers and communities. Through community organizing and collaboration, Byron strives to create a more inclusive and equitable society. Please join me in welcoming Byron Cruz.
thank you for not asking me or not having that station for makeup. Last time that I have a CBC interview, I had to stay in bench. And they were doing makeup. And then this is a nice environment. And big Ola from the BC Federation of Labor, and a huge hug from Solidarity hug from the Migrant Rights Network, who is a Migrant Rights Network is a it's a group we meet. We are formed by different migrant groups who are advocating for changes in at national level. And thank you, sisters. Thank you, brother, for your messages. Today is the day of the energy. Today is the day of the Jaguar, and Jaguar means energy too for other cultures. And thank you for allowing me as a migrant worker, as a refugee, to be in your lands. It has been
Stay with the mic.
tremendous time, more than 500 years of resistance. And as you said, it's time to rise up. It's time to come together. Everyone should come together. No one should be left behind on this effort. And the land, your territory has dignity. And we must protect it. We should be part of protecting it. And reading today an article that the importance of the good energy of today in terms of coming together, because we, as the children, as the daughters and sons of these territories, we knew how to do things in a protective way. When the invasion came, and all in 500 years, this planet has been destroyed. And hopefully in the next 500 years, we will stand in solidarity and resistance with our brothers and sisters from the First Nations. And when we talk about agricultural migrant workers, I want to also mention that thanks to the audience today for being here. Thanks for the audience also who are online. I know that many sisters who are caregivers are also listening, are also watching today online. We have been following the situation of the agricultural migrant workers. We should mention that also caregivers are being affected also in many areas in the interior by this. When we say migrant workers, we should acknowledge that the food that comes to our tables are thanks to that enormous contribution of the agricultural migrant workers. We should thank our sisters and brothers who are caregivers for taking care of the elder, taking care of the children. And we should thank those construction workers who we haven't been paying attention in terms of the heat waves and fires as well. And this year we will be paying attention and organize big waves of response from the construction workers. And the agricultural system in Canada receives more than 100,000 agricultural workers every year. British Columbia receives more than 10,000 workers who are coming mainly from the seasonal agricultural workers program, but also from the agricultural stream. The federal government kindly changed the name. They used to call them low skills workers. And it was until recently that they changed the name. The program has been in place for 5 decades. And in times of crisis, in terms of emergencies, in times of fires, in terms of floodings, in times of COVID. Migrant workers are uh, welcome, and the system says, "Oh yeah, you are welcome. You are essential workers." Never essential worker means an increase of wages. Never, never. And as soon as the COVID passes, as soon as the crisis passes, then no, you are not welcome anymore. International students are not welcome anymore. Migrant workers are not welcome anymore because you are causing the increase of the housing rent. The federal government has not paid a cent in the last 3 decades for social housing. They have been interested in breaking that cooperative system. And then how come they are, it's really hard right now to talk about, confronting fires in a time when racism and discriminations are part of the electoral time, when the system is pushing, using the racism, aggression against migrant workers, blaming migrant workers for what is happening in healthcare, what is happening in housing, right? But we should change that dynamic, right? There are so much energy here to change. Then, when a few years ago, actually, the first time when I heard about a complaint from workers was from a farm in Ashgrove, a big farm in Ashgrove, probably the biggest farm in Ashgrove. And they called and they said, "Byron, could you please help us? It has been a few weeks and the fires are beside the farm. We are sleeping and beside the fires, and the smoke is so hard." And then it was quite a few weeks finally, after making some phone calls to consulates and also to the workers' compensation, WCB, they went to check. And of course, that day that the inspector went, and everyone had nice masks. And as soon as the inspector leaves, they go back to the $1 store. That's very common. That's very common. It happened last year in Kelowna. In Kelowna also, in West Kelowna, there were evacuations. Every time that there is evacuations, we tried to make as many phone calls to WorkSafe BC, to the federal government, to do more inspections on the farms. And because many workers are forced to work under those conditions, and they don't, the owners don't, most of the owners don't follow the, unfortunately, recommendations. It should not be recommendations about emergency evacuation, about changing the times of work during the heat waves. And in our tour, we found out that more than 80% of the houses don't have any cooling system. And can you imagine the greenhouses that has like 5 to 10 more centimeters in temperature inside? And then there is no way of talking about climate justice without migrant justice. We should be taking into account that, because there's so much money going into human trafficking prevention. It's labor trafficking. And the problem is that the federal government cannot investigate themselves because they are the biggest human traffickers of these days, right? When they are paying all migrant workers minimum wage, when they are also exploiting my brothers and sisters every season. They are bringing thousands of people to West Kelowna and to the Okanagan area. They give them a 2 years working permit. They employ them a few weeks. Last year, they employed them like no more than 15 days. And then they use the word returning back home because the fires. They were basically we call that deportation as well, because they have precarious immigration status. They have what is called tied working permits because they can only work for one employer. And now they are coming with a nice word of saying, oh, we will create sectorial networks, because then it means that you can change to another farm if you need to change to another farm, and you can use that working permit. Your name goes to all the farmers in the area. No one will hire you. That's just 50 years and not access to permanent residence. 50 years. They lost their children because after 5 years of coming every season, you lose your family, you lose your parent, you lose your children as well. You lose so much. And lots of problems during the crisis of fires, floodings, heat waves, evacuations, like the emergency response teams come, sometimes RCMP comes and then they tell migrant workers, you have to get away from here. And they cannot understand. There is a difficulty in the language, right? And this, they don't have any translation in that during the emergency. Then many workers call and say, can you please help me? I don't know where to go. There is no response from the federal, immediate response from federal, provincial government. They are not talking. And some local governments respond with providing shelter. In solidarity, some communities welcome migrant workers in their houses. Other farm welcomes them. But last year we visited farms where they were basically people hungry, migrant workers who were left there without any support. Fortunately, with the coordination of different supporting agencies in the area, some of the Kelowna Community Services, Watari, and other services, and we were able to respond with that participation of the, at that time, the federal government decided, okay, we can give some food because we were telling them they are hungry, but he lost so many days of salary. Paychecks where people, the families were waiting for that paycheck. And 60% of the workforce in the agriculture in BC is in the hands of migrant workers. Then, well, it's important, we are coming to an important time, right? And then important time means that there is no plan, there should not be planned without us. No emergency plan without us. We should not be left behind. Thank you.
Have a labor force of convenience for some. And it was our hope that on this panel, we could shed some light on impacts of all of these fires that don't get a lot of attention. So thank you, Byron. Cross your fingers with me. I'm going to see if we now have John on the big screen. Do we have him? And
I can
introduce.
There we go.
There he is. Okay, John. Well, I've already introduced you. I'll
You
bring
sure?
him back up. John,
Yeah.
thank you for staying up late. And we're going to toss it over to you.
Oh, thanks. So good to be with you all. I
Hold
wish
up,
I could.
hold up, John. We just need
Okay.
you to make sure you're unmuted.
Yeah, I'm unmuted.
Okay, we're just going to bring your sound up. I'll give you a 1, 2, 3.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Check. 1, 2, 3. Check, check. How are we looking?
We heard something there in the back.
All right. Yeah, no, I cranked my mic up at my end.
Okay.
So I can see little green lights on my speaker or my microphone.
Yeah, we can't hear you yet. Hang on a sec, John.
Wow, okay. Well, I can keep talking and 1, 2. 1, 2, check. 1, 2, greetings from Ottawa.
Does this sound okay?
Huh.
So
Well,
hold on one.
so. Check 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. Uh, well, shall I keep talking? Or are you just, can anyone read lips? That's, yeah, no, everything is looking, pretty good here. I've got a little Emiko Newman indicator with the mic off. How are we doing? 1, 2, 1, 2, start talking. Uh, Go ahead. Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. I just can't hear anybody else, but so I will start talking if I'm instructed to start talking, but I can't hear anybody over there. Okay, got to go ahead. Increase your volume. My volume's pretty jacked up as it is. I've gone into audio settings. Yeah, okay. I just can't hear myself coming out of the speaker there, but I will begin. Thank you very much for that extraordinarily generous introduction. I wish I could be with all of you in person, and really deeply moved by what I've heard so far. And there's just so many. I mean, what we're seeing here is how huge and broad this issue of climate change and its most charismatic manifestations, fire and smoke, are and right on our most immediate communities. So I was really struck at the beginning by what Cecilia said about her grandfather and about the idea of the city of Vancouver landing on him like a building, kind of coming out of nowhere and just suddenly growing up and being there. And I think that's how a lot of people, a lot of us are feeling around the more obvious manifestations of climate change, intense fire, intense smoke, this notion of what summer is, of what a healthy day looks like, is really changing before our eyes in real time. And that is a lot to catch up to. And what Joe was saying about how the visions of nature and what his landscape looked like when he was young, I think all of us, if we reflect back, have some version of that. And what Joe is tabulating, what Joe is manifesting is memory, is remembering how it was. And I think a lot of us tend to sort of recalibrate in this kind of semi-conscious way to, well, that's just how it is now. And I guess maybe I won't take that trip to the Okanagan this summer because I don't want to get smoked out. But instead of remembering and holding dear and really holding our reality to the standard of what we remembered, because what a lot of us remember is a more healthy, stable ecosystem. And so we're seeing those changes right now. And I'm kind of late to the game in a way. It wasn't until 2016 when I saw what we all saw, which was the city of Fort McMurray, a city of nearly 100,000 people, disappear under a gigantic fire cloud that we eventually learned was 45,000 feet tall, was generating its own lightning, was turning the same way a hurricane turns, and generating black hail composed of the embers of what remained of the forests and houses below. So this was really shocking to everybody who tuned into it, who paid attention to it. And, you know, as a journalist, as somebody who wasn't immediately involved in trying to evacuate or trying to fight the fire or trying to save people, I was able to kind of look at it in a more global way, you know, from a kind of higher elevation, kind of up there with that smoke cloud, and see the larger system. And you know, there is a place for that. You know, we need first responders desperately, and the firefighters, police officers, water truck drivers, who stayed behind and fought the fire day after day, and kind of more strangely, and in some ways more importantly, night after night, paid a real price for that. And I think while many of us have forgotten about that fire, the respiratory systems, the general health of the people who stayed and fought that fire day after day, and actually week after week, because that fire burned for an extraordinarily long time. Many of the firefighters I spoke to basically are reconciled to living shorter lives because of that fire. First responders who responded to Hurricane Katrina and were in that toxic, molding, destroyed city for weeks on end, they also have strange health issues that are persistent. The first responders who responded to the World Trade Centers on 9/11, they also, because of inhaling basically an entire building's worth of chemical and dust and silicate and everything in between, now the responders to the Fort McMurray fire are part of that group, and there's more and more of them. And they are they're not only on the front lines of the disaster, but they're also on the front lines of the health impacts. And then for those who managed to escape safely, fortunately, you know, no one was lost in the flames in Fort McMurray. And when you think of how many were involved in that fire, the fact that it was the largest, most rapid evacuation in modern times due to fire anywhere on Earth, that happened right in Canada, right in Alberta. The fact that no one was lost in the flames is not a minor miracle. It's probably a major miracle, especially when we look at Lahaina, when we look at Lytton, BC, when we look at what happened in Valparaiso, Chile, just about 2 months ago. Around 200 people died in those fires. So what happened in Fort McMurray was extraordinary, both for its mercy and that everybody got out of the flames. There were other injuries and deaths later, but we generally got everybody out alive. But that doesn't mean that we got away clean. And many of the people who were involved in that fire don't live in Fort McMurray anymore. They left. And despite the fact that I would say the residents of Fort McMurray got probably the most generous, most hassle-free insurance payout en masse of any disaster. And that's probably unlikely to happen again. That was an extraordinary moment in time, but nonetheless, many of the evacuees didn't want to come back. Many of them have PTSD. Many of their children have PTSD. So there are people walking around in our communities now who look fine, but are carrying these wounds, maybe in their respiratory system, maybe in their immune system, maybe in their psyche, as the result of smoke and fire. So another really shocking statistic that really brought me up short, and again has just given me kind of more energy to lean into this topic and the urgency of it as really a safety issue and a national security issue for Canada, is that 250,000 Canadians were on the road last summer, displaced by wildfire. These are not refugees coming out of a war-torn country. This is 250,000 Canadians on the road in their own country, not sure when they can go back, not sure what will be there when they get back, not sure if they even want to go back. That's not the Canada we know, just the way Joe is talking about his home not looking or feeling the way it used to feel. That's true for all of us. 10 years ago, if you asked a Canadian, do you know anyone who's been evacuated due to fire? That would be a very regional question, and most people would say no. And now I bet you there is no Canadian who doesn't know somebody who has been evacuated. And that is a change in 10 years. That's again, like that building falling on us. Like, where did that come from? This was the landscape I thought I knew, and now it's this different world. So we're dealing with this very rapid change, and it's understandable. And we should have some compassion for ourselves and even our leaders for being a bit slow to respond. It's massive. It's a huge systemic change. It's a huge psychic shift. And what I learned from 7 years of working on fire weather is that never underestimate how tightly we want to hold on to our status quo. We want to do the thing we're used to doing. We want to do it the way that, for those of us who are in a system that's working for us, most of us want to keep doing that. Even if there are a lot of indicators that this is no longer a productive or even safe way to behave. And where we see that the most strongly is in the petroleum industry. Now, there are real issues at different levels of that industry, but for the worker who's not in charge of policy, who's not in charge of PR, who's not in charge of managing or manipulating the media, they want to do their job. And they want to do it in a predictable way so that they can fulfill their obligations, whether it's to the bank for their mortgage, or to the car dealership paying off their vehicle, or to their kids and their partners who may have developed a certain standard for how they want to live and what they want to do and where they want to do it. And so if working for the petroleum industry is how you manifest that reality, then you can see why people really might want to hold tightly to that. At the same time, we're living now in this increasingly sort of shrill and grinding dissonance between Canada's national project, which seems to be to expand petroleum. Both the bitumen industry is now exporting more than 4 million barrels a day of diluted bitumen and related products out of Fort McMurray. That's a new record. And they're doing it, though, with fewer workers. Workers are being laid off steadily and in large numbers in Alberta. And meanwhile, out here in BC, where we are, where I wish I could be with you, LNG, liquid natural gas, appears to be in the ascendant. And we know that liquid natural gas is basically methane, and methane is one of the most potent greenhouse gases, far more potent than CO2. And Dave Eby, who I wish could be part of this panel, he knows this. And this is this allegiance to the status quo. We want to have economic growth. We want to have trade. But it looks like we want to do it the way we were doing it in 1980. And we can't. And nature is telling us that. And nature is going to tell us that in increasingly rigorous terms the longer we persist. And so I was thinking about, what do we need from our leaders? And one of the things we need, I don't know if a lot of you might not remember Jean Chrétien, but he was the prime minister 25 years ago or so. And love him or hate him, he stood up to the United States. The United States decided it wanted to invade Iraq, really under false, fabricated pretenses. And they assembled a coalition of the willing. And you know how powerful and persuasive the United States can be. And they got many nations on board with them. And Canada, we share this massive border with the United States. We are great allies, historic allies of the United States. We have fought wars together. We share so much family together across the border. And Chrétien said, no, I'm not going to commit troops to your, frankly, falsely pretensed invasion of Iraq. And that was an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. We can only imagine the pressure that Chrétien was under from the United States to, hey, you know, you're our guy, and where are you now? Canada's, you know, always, you know, goes with us. So that was costly, but now, when you look back at the disaster that Iraq turned into, that Iraq remains, Chrétien's reluctance, refusal to send in troops at that time, makes him look like a visionary genius and also a brave statesman. Canada has brave statesmen and brave stateswomen. They're alive today. Some of them may not even be in office yet. And that's the kind of strength we need. Instead of responding to the pressure from the United States to go join a war that is a disaster from beginning to end, we need to resist the pressure of the petroleum industry. And that is a touchy proposition because petroleum has given us a lot. It gives us a lot right now. And what I think that my understanding is, in Canada, the petroleum industry would have you believe, many people in office right now would have you believe that we can't survive without it. And we need to look outside our borders to see what others are doing. And I just want to give you a few stats, and then I'm going to stop. Last November, stats have been gathered for this. 1 in 5 vehicles sold worldwide were electric. The world's 4th and 5th largest economies, that's Germany and California, both get more than 50% of their electricity from renewables. That wasn't always the case. They have retooled and committed themselves to wind and solar. In the past couple of weeks, I want to call it the nation of California, the state of California, same population as Canada, has generated for multiple hours every day as much as 150% of its electricity needs. These are the electricity needs of 40 million people through wind and solar alone. Uruguay, a pretty large nation in Latin America, in fact, roughly the same size as the area, the 18 million hectares that burned in Canada last summer. Uruguay ran on 100% renewable energy for its electricity needs for 5 months. The state of South Dakota, which, you know, is not the most progressive, tree-hugging American state, you know, it's quite a conservative place, is now above 90% renewables, mostly wind, on an annual basis. Texas, which is really almost the twin of Alberta, politically, religiously, energetically, mythologically. You know, this is, you know, cattle and oil and wide open spaces, and we, you know, are independent and bootstrappy folks who are often alienated from the feds. Well, Texas, in 1 month, installed 50% of the amount of solar that Canada has installed ever in its entire history. Again, Texas is a very conservative state. You cannot talk climate change there, but they see the future, and the future includes an energy transition. And it's hard to see that happening in Canada. But we can see it if we look beyond our borders. And what we have in Canada is renewable energy potential that should be the envy of the world. We could power the entire North American continent if we approached renewable energy with the zeal and the subsidizing energy with which we got cokers and fractionators and upgraders built in -40 temperatures in remote Fort McMurray. We did that. Canadians did that. And if we can do that, we can also transition quickly and gracefully into a future that's powered by renewable energy. And the other thing, last thing I want to say about Canadians is we are a sophisticated people able to hold more than one idea in our minds at one time. We can deploy traditional burning practices on the landscape at the same time that we deploy renewable energy infrastructure, at the same time that we develop and also deploy a managed retreat from petroleum dependence. This has been modeled for us. This is possible now. This is not a pie in the sky fantasy. And fire is going to be a part of our world, you know, for the rest of our lives. It always has been. It belongs on our landscape. Joe has made that abundantly clear. And we have to renegotiate our relationship to it. And also to how we derive energy, which right now is fire driven, because that's why we're so interested in petroleum, because it burns. So fire is a huge part of our lives, way bigger than we realize. Anyway, I'll stop there, but thank you for your good attention, and been learning a lot this evening from the rest of you. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
You're echoing like crazy, but yes.
Okay, you can hear me.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you heard the applause. And notwithstanding the tech challenges we were having, I actually think the reversal of the order of the speakers worked great. So thank you for that. With the late start, we have a little less time than we had hoped. I'm going to pose some questions to the panelists, and I'm going to ask you all to try to keep your answers as concise as possible. I can't resist with that last little bit that you shared, John, also sharing this little tidbit. Some people will know we've been, my organization, the Climate Emergency Unit's been campaigning on this idea of a youth climate corps, and this idea of having a program that would say to everyone under 35, would you like to spend 2 years confronting these emergencies, or making our communities more resilient, or helping to drive down emissions? We polled on the Youth Climate Corps with Abacus data. Very strong support, but there's one piece of the poll result that I wanted to share with you, which is that when we asked only those under 35, would you yourself want to enroll in a Youth Climate Corps if it existed for 2 years? In Alberta, 47% of the young people in Alberta under the age of 35 said they either definitely or probably would want to enroll themselves. Okay, my first question is for whichever of the panelists want to take it. But I'd like to hear a little bit more from you about what you make of how our governments are dealing with these events. So both their actions in the midst of the crisis moments themselves, but also their preventative and preparatory actions. What's your take on how both the federal and provincial governments' responses to wildfires to date has been? Do you want to go first, John?
Sure. Well, I just think no one is really appreciating the gravity of the issue. And I think I bet there is in some quarters kind of the hope that, well, 2023 was an anomaly and we'll all get back to normal. And there's been some late season snow and in the Rockies and some precipitation in the prairies in the past week or two. But no, we're really in this new regime. And again, this goes back to the status quo. We really have to completely rethink. Once you start rethinking energy, and once you start rethinking your relationship to the petroleum industry, then you've got to rethink your relationship to the bank and to who gets elected and why, and to the petroleum lobby. And so it really, and that's what we heard from the first speakers, was all the different ways that this issue creeps into our lives and really impacts it in negative ways. And I think all of us are feeling that individually, if you sit anybody down individually. And I think, the elephant in the living room here are is the petroleum industry and their investors who are the most invested, so to speak, in every sense, fighting for their survival, the most invested in the status quo, in keeping the petroleum flowing, and more important, keeping it burning, really at all costs. And so there really has been, for the past 50 years, this kind of magical thinking disconnect that I can generate this substance, I can produce petroleum, I can fuel the economy, I can satisfy my shareholders, I can generate dividends, but somehow this virtuous thing I'm engaged in, which is generating profit and wealth for the people who've invested in my company, is somehow separate from the natural laws of chemistry and physics that control our world. And what's happening right now is those two, the fantasy of consequence-free capitalism and the harsh reality of the chemical and physical limitations of planet Earth, specifically our atmosphere, but really every system, those are coming into sharper and sharper and more violent relief. And so what you're going to see, on the one hand, 47% of Albertans who say, hey, I see a problem here and I want to deal with it, because that's actually something Albertans are really good at. They are really good at responding to evidence in front of them and acting in strong, committed, meaningful ways. That's how you got everybody out of Fort McMurray without finding bodies in the basement. That was everybody's fear, deepest fear, was when they went back after the fire was out, who or what were they going to find behind? They didn't find anybody because Albertans got them all out. So we can do it. We can respond even to shocking assaults on our status quo. But we also really need to identify, and we really need our leaders to identify, the people who are trying to compromise those efforts and stifle those efforts. So, for example, and I'll stop here, but Charlie Angus, is launched this private members bill to call out and basically make illegal false advertising by the petroleum industry. That seems basic and reasonable, but he is getting a lot of pushback for that, and it may not work. It may not pass. And yet, right now, you have this elephant in the living room who's allowed to tell lies. And that is super dangerous. And so the more we have to kind of wade through this kind of ideological dissonance that is out of sync with what's actually happening on the ground, it makes it hard to act in a meaningful way unless it's a crisis. And crises are of necessity a short-term response. But the problem with modern fire, it's not a short-term response. The fire in Fort McMurray burned all day, all night, all day, all night, all day, all night. Firefighters, they just stayed awake because they're duty bound. That's what they do. They fight fires. They protect people. They protect communities. Well, the fire never stopped, so they never stopped. So now you have these guys staggering around with heavy equipment, 48 hours of no sleep, 56 hours of no sleep, breathing the burning house fumes, which is one of the most poisonous things you can breathe. So, we gotta hear from those unions, I think, and we gotta hear from individuals. And there's a lot of, I feel like there's just a lot of silencing happening, and we need that sort of Chrétien-like person or a Charlie Angus-like person to sort of come out bravely and say what I think a lot of us all actually know, or even if we don't know it intellectually, we can't cite the stats, we are feeling it. And we should trust what we're feeling, and it doesn't feel right. And a lot of us want to do something about it, going back to that really amazing and super encouraging 47% stat. And there's a lot of us out here who are concerned and ready to act. I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
should be that there's a lot of disjointment between the federal government and the provincial government. There's not enough communication. Provincially, the let burn policy of wildfires in the summertime needs to be re-looked at, especially when, you know, we're in a drought, we're in a heat wave, a provincial emergency, with multiple evacuations and highway closures and power outages. And the smoke, you know, is so thick that they can't see what the fire is doing. And at the same time, like he was saying, that fire is burning 24 hours a day. And when they finally decide to attack the fire, it's beyond resources. And so they get themselves into trouble by leaving the fire for too long. So that's one thing that needs to be looked at, is that let burn policy. It affects a lot of indigenous Indian reserves, especially. But you know, overall, when you think about that, you think about tourism, and you think highway closures, power outages. You just can't go, you know, to the lake and go swimming, or the river, or camping. That kind of stuff is all out because the summers are just full of smoke 24 hours a day. You can't be outside for more than 15 to 20 minutes, or you shouldn't be. So that let burn policy, I think, needs to be looked at. And like I was saying, the disjointment between the federal and the provincial, I think there's a lot of people that could do the work that's required. But there's not enough push to have the people certified to fight fires. Where people want to stay and fight fires, it gets criminalized to save their own house. And in most cases, especially last year, the firefighters couldn't fight the fire because they couldn't see the tops of the trees. They couldn't see where the fire was, so they couldn't respond to the fires. But the people that actually stayed home and wanted to protect their homes were actually criminalized for fighting the fire to save their home. Kind of doesn't make any sense, but so I think a lot of training, I think a lot of public awareness too of where you live, of that, what fuel type you're in, and you know, the dryness of the fuel during the heat of the summer. You know, just so many things that can cause your area to be in danger from fire. I can't really speak to at the federal level, but for me, thinking about the federal level, that's bringing in other countries to fight fires. You know, it's not totally a bad thing, but it's very expensive. And that's pretty much all I can say, is that, you know, we have the people here to fight the fires, and we should put them to work first before we bring in people from out of the country to fight fires.
I want to ask a question of all three of you. So I'll go maybe in reverse order, come back to you, Joe. But we have a provincial election in October. So is there one or two things that specific policy changes that you would like to see on the agenda? That particularly more on the preventative side. So like Byron, in terms of the communities you work with, are there particular changes to the WorkSafe rules, to the seasonal agriculture worker rules that need to be made in recognition of those heat and smoke conditions that people face?
Thank you. Last question on this question. We don't know the plans from the provincial or federal governments, and up to now, we haven't been consulted as migrant communities on the response. And in terms of, we know what we are doing, and we have been coordinating how to support our communities. And we have been training people on emergency response. And in terms of what is coming, I would like to mention that we are pressuring for the end of the 3-month waiting list to get MSP, because a migrant worker that needs emergency services without MSP, it's thousands of dollars. And the provincial government hasn't paid attention to our campaign for the end of the 3 months waiting period for getting access to medical services plan. And then the provincial government has been absent in terms of funding, in terms of monitoring what is going on in the farms. And we need a strong presence of the provincial government. We still have hopes that they will come together and have a coordination with the federal government, because that coordination is absent. And you're right, that monitoring of WorkSafe BC, getting away from doing recommendations, but we need policy changes in terms of the inspections to the farms. And because so far, every time that an inspection comes to the farms, they are prepared for that, then it looks very nice that day. As soon as the inspector goes, things got to the bad system of precarious housing, crowded housing, and at the same time, violations of their labor rights and health and safety rights as well.
Yes. Maura, what policy changes would you like to see on the order paper?
I think that the healthcare challenges, first off, they're enormous. They're going to be very, very expensive. There was I found a December 2023 Government of BC wildfire season summary, which noted that the health impacts are, in quotes, unquantifiable, end quotes. So they really have no idea. So we need to measure that stuff. We need to have some metrics of how much money we're spending. We need to be measuring direct and indirect impacts. And we need to be measuring the health of the mental health and what happens with people, how they recover, how are they rehoused, how do they return to their lives. And then the other thing is there's an amazing opportunity to engage people by talking about the positives of having clean air. There was a study in LA last year where they looked at a suburb where 2% of gas cars were taken off the road. So they were buying EVs, but it doesn't have to be EVs. It could be public transport. The point was 2% fewer gas cars. There was 0.41 parts per billion less nitrogen dioxide in the atmosphere, the local atmosphere. And that correlated with 3.2% fewer emergency visits for asthma. So there's immediate health benefits, like right away, tomorrow, in your health, in your community. And so we can engage the population by talking about health, because the Lancet Planetary Health has actually called climate change the biggest public health crisis of our time. We have to deal with that. And we also can use that as an opportunity to engage people, because everybody wants to breathe clean air and drink clean water and have their children grow up in a healthy environment. That's something, it doesn't matter what your politics are, that matters to everybody in a very, very basic level. And I think that our media needs to be talking about that more. When we have there was a study that actually just came out this week where they looked at media around the 2021 heat dome in BC. It was a study from Ottawa, and they found that only 16% of media talked about the health risks, the danger people were in. Most of it was showing people at the beach and at the water park and having fun in the sun, and like, sure, but really it's a big risk, and people died, and it was horrible. And that should be the front page. When there's an extreme event, a wildfire or smoke or heat dome, people need to know that this is very risky, and that what we have to do is stop burning fossil fuels, and that there are alternatives that have a real positive health co-benefit that is good for all of us, no matter who you are, where you live, or what you think politically.
Thanks. Thanks. Excellent point. So Joe, to come back to you, you were talking before about what needs to change in terms of the response in the moment to when the fires are happening. What other changes are needed on the preventative side?
Um, so the use of fire to reduce the fuel and just actually just reducing the fuel, you know, before summer even comes. If you think about when you're young, there was no smoked out days. There was never any evacuations. You know, now my daughter sitting right there, you know, she's 15 years old, right? By the time I was 15 years old, I had never seen a smoky day. You know, my days were blue skies and you know, running around playing and doing all kinds of stuff. And now we've been through multiple evacuations in the Merritt, Skeetiston area. You know, a month and a half out of our house, come back, and then the atmospheric river hit, right? And then we're back out again in Merritt. You know, and came back at Christmas times. So these climate change things that are happening, these pendulum swings from, you know, good to bad and worse, and you know, all that. You know, it's got to mean something to somebody that the policy changes in the government would add the use of fire and the fuel mitigation, wildfire mitigation, things that need to happen, and in the fall, in the winter, and in the spring, have a little bit of smoke and some piles burning, some thinning the trees, getting rid of the fuel around the communities, around the infrastructures that are valuable. And when the summer does come, you have a lot less fuel to burn. That's just a start, right? That's just a start. It's just the places where people live. Protect that area. 2.5 kilometers around those areas need to be protected.
Thanks. I want to apologize if you had hoped to ask a question and we just didn't have time tonight. I'm going to ask one last question of all of the panelists. You don't all have to answer it. In fact, and more you sort of did already, but it has to do with the media, the mainstream media. I'd love to know from you, get your thoughts if you have any. What is the media doing well? Where are they dropping the ball? How are they handling misinformation or disinformation about these fires? Because that's really out there too. John, if you're still with us, I might see if you want to go first.
Sure. Hi. Boy, I mean, we're so used to it now that it's almost like we don't notice it. But it's so extraordinary that for 50 years, we have understood, not just people who are looking at climate science, but petroleum companies, the media has also reported on this. Everybody involved has understood that anthropogenic CO2 and methane are changing the climate for the worse. They're making it more dangerous. We understand that burning fossil fuels, whether it's coal or natural gas, exacerbates this problem. And yet the media tends to report on these disasters, which are taking up more and more bandwidth in the media because there's so many more of them, without connecting those dots in a really clear, disciplined, and kind of backgrounded way. I mean, this is, I just speaking to a reporter at Global News, they have a crew on 24-hour fire watch all the time. so that they can respond to the next fire. They're like their own fire department or ambulance service, but for fire, it's dedicated to fire. That certainly was not the case 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So here they are reporting on it, that, you know, they've got brave camera people, brave journalists who are right in there getting this incredible footage without immediately having a climate scientist on there, without immediately putting on, cranking up the attribution software, which is now able to analyze a given event, whether it's a hurricane or a wildfire or a heat dome, and look at to what degree human enhanced climate change played an impacted that. We know so much, and what's happening is these areas of expertise, people who can really get in there quickly and get really graphic footage of refugees and firefighting efforts, disaster response, and also people who have incredible satellite information, who have incredible insight and understanding, and a lifetime now of study of these phenomena. And they all need to be in the same room. The same way, I think Dave Eby and Mike Flanagan from Thompson Rivers University, who's a wildfire specialist, we need those guys in the same room. We need Catherine Hayhoe here. And I think there's an advantage to keeping us sort of siloed and separate that enables the status quo to drag on. And this is a term we all need to know that Alex Steffen, a futurist from Berkeley, California, coined. It's called predatory delay. And I think you can just intuitively understand what that is. It's like a big company that understands that it's responsible for making climate change worse, talking about greenwashing, asking you what your carbon footprint is, hiring more lawyers, hiring more lobbyists, so that they can maintain this profitable status quo whose real costs are going to be borne by others later. And that later is actually now sooner. We are in it now. We are paying the cost. There's a lot of other things we could be doing this evening, but we are paying the cost right now together. So that is getting media to really look bravely and make the connections for all of us.
Midnight for you, so thank you for keeping your energy up. Do any of the three of you get some applause here? Do any of the three of you want to make any comment about media? Yes.
In our case, just quickly, the response to big media respect to migrant workers on wildfires or fires happening has been not invisible, actually. Some interesting alternative media has been very active, going to the root cause of the situation. And the big media basically focus on the interest of the big farm owners, never talk about what is behind the farm owners. You see also those big propaganda thing about organic farms. What is behind the organic farms is exploited worker. Then we need to pay more attention to that.
Yeah.
And also the media needs to protect those indigenous warriors who have been defending the territories and defending the rivers, and who have the knowledge to let us know what to do.
My recollection from last summer's, the Tyee, the Narwhal, Canada's National Observer had some good coverage on all of those, but the mainstream media, not that I saw. Would either of the two of you want to add anything about media?
I would just support what John said, in that we need to start drawing like the attribution of the climate event and correlate that with the health impact, both in terms of the risks to individuals so that people can keep themselves and their communities safe, and also to give us an idea of how much it's costing us. It's a ridiculously humongous amount of money, and we need to stop doing this so that we stop having to spend all that money. It's just going to get worse.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think for me, living in Skeetchison where it is vulnerable to a wildfire, we need to know where the fires are, what they're doing, which way they're going, uh, the the weather systems, what's expected to come in, and how it's going to affect the fire. And the people need to know um, the locations of each fire, not just the major fires, but new starts and everything like that too. I was talking to you about the stress that builds, right from say about July 1st to it used to be the end of September, but it's getting into October now, like how long the heat lasts, where you're ready to evacuate at any time, 15 minutes and you leave. That stress, of being smoked in and not being able to see where the fires are and not having accurate information about what's going on and that kind of stuff. That's that everyday stress and not being able to sleep and, that just that pressure of, you know, of wanting to keep our families safe. It really wears on you at like accumulated fatigue syndrome kind of. And that stems from media, sensationalizing certain fires, but not, making a broad picture of what we need to know.
Yeah. That's stress. So look, we said we were going to get you out of here by 9, but indulge me for a moment because I'm not going to let you out of here without a call to action. But don't worry, I'm not going to ask you for money. So, on this media question, last year, our unit teamed up with SFU's Community Engaged Research Initiative, and we did this 2-week study of we had teams of volunteers across the country monitoring CBC reporting on the climate emergency. And there have been improvements. I think when we all reflect on last summer, our public broadcaster did a much better job of covering the fires, and in particular of connecting the fires to climate change. What they did not do is connect climate change to the burning of fossil fuels. We need to tell the truth. We need our leaders to tell the truth. We need our media to tell the truth. I want to close I want to read you a little bit of what California Governor Gavin Newsom said when he went to the UN Climate Summit last September. Okay, this is what he said. This climate crisis is a fossil fuel crisis. The climate crisis persists. It's not complicated. It's the burning of oil. It's the burning of gas. It's the burning of coal. And we need to call that out. For decades and decades, the oil industry has been playing each and every one of us in this room for fools. They've been buying off politicians. They've been denying and delaying science and fundamental information that they were privy to and that they didn't share or they manipulated. Their deceit and denial going back decades has created the conditions that persist here today. That's some truth telling. He's also suing them for damages. When was the last time you heard a federal or provincial leader in Canada talk that way? So here's my call to action. The fires are coming. It's going to be a rough summer. And we need to change the conversation and the narrative about those fires. And in a way that links the fires to the burning of fossil fuels and the dangers of LNG expansion in our province. And we need to do what the media isn't doing. Every time you hear one of these reporting on one of these events, call in to the radio shows, write a letter to the editor, make clear who the real arsonists are here, the fossil fuel corporations. And then we need to make this an election issue so that we stop adding fuel to the fire, stop making the problem worse, stop collaborating with the arsonists, ask candidates their plans, press every party in our government to stop the expansion of LNG, stop tying new buildings into natural gas lines, if you're part of an organization that has not yet signed the open letter of the BC Climate Emergency Campaign with its 10 urgent calls to action, just go to bcclimateemergency.org. You can see the open letter, bring it to your organization, ask them to sign, join with us in pressing both the federal and provincial government for a youth climate corps. I'll leave it at there. For now, please join me in thanking all 4 of our panelists heartily. Thank you again to Cecilia, to Emiko and Mari and Mary and Angelo from the BC Climate Emergency Campaign, to Katie and Jack from the UBC Center for Climate Justice, to Porter for the tech support and the good folks here at UBC Robson Square. Reminder that Upstart and Crow have signed copies of John's book in the lobby, which just came out in paperback. And thank you all for joining us. Be safe now and this summer, and good night.